The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.
Thank you, Rob. It is 7 minutes after 8. A very good morning to you and a warm welcome to the Forum at 8 here on SAfm, South Africa's news and information leader. Well, this morning, looking at the issue of land reform in this country. Mentioned just before the news, some of these utterances made by President Jacob Zuma over the weekend. He spoke about the commitment initially made at the 52nd National Conference of the ANC in Polokwane to transfer 30% of the 82 million hectares of agricultural land, which was white-owned in 1994, to black people by 2014. He went on to say that the ANC government is unlikely to meet this target given the slow pace of land reform in this country. He therefore says they have directed the government to urgently speed up the process through a variety of measures. The implementation of these measures will take into account the principles contained in the Constitution in relation to land expropriation. We will replace the principle of willing buyer, willing seller, he said, which has not sufficiently addressed the problem, with the just and equitable principle when expropriating land for land reform purposes. Right then, time for us to just look at the details and as far as these matters are concerned. Why has this process been as slow as it is? What progress is there to report in as far as these matters are concerned? And what we will do at this time is we'll start in our studios in Pretoria, where I'm joined this morning by Minister Gugile Nkwinti. He is the Minister of Rural Development and Land Reform. A very good morning to you, Minister.
Good morning, Papa Joe. Good morning, listeners.
Thank you for your time this morning. Also joining me on the line is Professor Gilingwe Mayende. He is the Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the Central University of Technology in the Free State. He's the former Director General of the Department of Land Affairs. Professor Mayende, nice talking to you this morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Xolani.
Nice one. Thank you very much for your time. Much appreciated. Also, Professor Ruth Hall, Associate Professor at the Institute for Poverty, Land and Agrarian Studies Plus at the University of the Western Cape. Professor Hall, hello.
Morning, Xolani, and to the Minister and Professor Mayende.
Thank you for your time. Let me start with the Minister. Minister, first and foremost, and I read the statement from the President over the weekend. He says that we are unlikely to meet this target given the slow pace of land reform. But firstly, I would like to know what we know at this stage. Do we have any reliable, verifiable figures about land reform progress? What do we know? How much land has been transferred to blacks since 1994?
Good morning, Doc. Good morning, Ruth. No.
Good morning, Minister.
Thank you. Mpepet, when you talk about 30%, remember this, that 82 million hectares of land is a whole thing that we're talking about. 30% is 24.5 million hectares of that.
Yeah.
Now, the 7% you referred to is 7% of the 82. Now, the what we have done up to now, since 1994, we have transferred about 7% of the 82, but we have transferred about 16% of the 4.5. Very, very inadequate indeed. So that's how far we've gone.
All right, 7% of the 82 million hectares.
Mm-hmm.
What are the impediments? What are the problems?
Firstly, remember this, that when we said 30% of land to be transferred, one of the things that we perhaps lost sight of is that land reform is not just transfer of land. It's restitution. It's development. We completely ignored development, and what we have done now is we also contribute to the slowing down. Is that we took 25% of that since 2010. Took 25% of the baseline budget of land for development. So we're doing a lot of development now. But secondly, the challenge is also that, you see, when you use a willing buyer, willing seller model, which is a market-based model for transfer of land, you one of the things we do is to distort the land market, because when land is transferred at a horizontal level, Mangaliso and Josop, then the market is fine, it works well. But when the state enters, then it distorts the market because the prices go up. Thirdly, our own laxity. We've also been a bit lethargic in the way in which we are doing things. And when it came to, for example, when you look at restitution as part of that, the model, I think, hasn't been that good. You can't employ people who have to do that work on a contract basis and expect that they can work themselves out of the job. We changed that model. Only 4 commissioners are on contract. Those are in Pretoria. All of the provinces are full-time Public Service Act employment. And perhaps lastly, we perhaps we the whole process, the bureaucracy, the whole system of state itself does contribute to the slowdown. And of course the prices.
Right. I just want to go back to the 7%, if I may, for a minute. What is the nature of the 7%? I mean, is it land transferred from white commercial farmers to black commercial farmers, or
That's
is it
correct.
Is strictly?
That's correct.
And what is the current state of that land? Is it operational? Is it working?
The one that's been transferred?
Yes, please.
That's the one I was talking about. 70, and that was saying we took 25% of the baseline budget since 2010. A lot of that has been recapitalized now and functional. The first year we recapitalized about 600, and last year 695 of those. We're looking at 416 this year. So it's moving very, very well.
So the 7% is currently commercial land that is working.
Yes, and
people are tilling that land.
You see, the again, Kolan, part of the problem with the model that we adopted in restitution, for example. You identify land because it's been claimed. You do the research, verification, and all that, and then you gazette that. Once you gazette, two things in the main happen. One, the expectations of people who claim the land, they immediately think the land is theirs. Two, the owner stops development. Thirdly, we take a long time to settle the claim, 10 years and so on. By the time you take it over, it's not worth the amount of money you're paying. And nothing is happening on the land. So there's a lot of money that we are spending now on recapitalizing those lands, and many of them.
I just want to, because again, 7% of the targeted 30% back in 1994. So over 18 years or so, you've only been able to transfer 7%. Do you, and some people have asked this question about whether or not ours in this country will actually end up being a disorderly land reform process?
It's not going to be. It could have been.
But what are the guarantees? I mean, how do you know that if it is this low, what are the chances that it may end up being pretty disorderly?
I don't think so. I think, talking to people, we're doing a lot of, I'm sure a lot of people will come through here. We do a lot of consultation with people. And of course, the second thing perhaps, which is very, very important, is the announcement with the president at the weekend that we reopen the land claim, the lodgement date, because that's part of the problem. We set very, very strict time frames, 5 years, and yet we're talking about land which was taken over from people over centuries. We say 5 years, we're giving you a window to claim land. Lots of people didn't claim, few people claim. So it would have created a lot of tight tension. It's very, very important that of course, the ruling party or the governing party at the weekend took the decision and now actually set South Africans on a more constructive course to dealing with the land question.
But it may only, one of the things that will happen out of that opening of the lodgement is that it will complicate matters further. If it takes 10 years to settle one claim, it's going to take another 10 to settle newer claims.
Perhaps yes, but listen to this, that one of the things you said yourself earlier on, Pepito, was that the president said we're moving away from the willing buyer, willing seller model.
But he's been saying that since 2007.
No, it's because there was no institution. You see, this is one of the shortcomings. South Africans are not critical about how we're looking at this matter. You cannot say we change because we have a law. Law is not enough. You need an institution to manage that change, sustain that change, make it work. We have introduced in South Africa now, and Cabinet has approved this 2 months ago. We're busy working on the codification of Section 25(3) of the Constitution. Cabinet approved an institution called the Office of the Valuer General, which will move away from the willing buyer, willing seller. It will replace that when it comes to the state entering the land market.
The worry is that in 2007, this was already clear that this policy is not working. It's taking 5 years to establish an institution. So it's going to take another 5 to 10 years then to start working on these matters.
No, it's taken me 3 years to establish this thing. Nobody thought about it before. The institution of Valuer General, we studied about it 2010, it's done now. This year is going to implement it. So it's going to work. We're busy codifying now. The Section 25(3).
All right, let me bring in my other guest. Professor Mayande, your thoughts on the statements made over the weekend, but also on the progress of the land reform process in this country.
Yes, Tolani, thank you very, very much. Yeah, I'd like to say that the statements made by the President over the weekend are really very encouraging. Especially, with regard to the whole issue around the willing buyer, willing seller model. However, I think we need to take a few steps back and reflect on this issue so that as we move forward, we ensure that we do not repeat errors that have been committed in the past. Mm-hmm. For example, I think we must remember, first of all, the willing buyer, willing seller model is a colonial construct. It was introduced by the British government led by Margaret Thatcher in 1979 during the Lancaster House.
All right, Professor Gilingwe, the line is really terrible. All right, let's get him on another line. Professor Mayenda, we'll get him on another line. Professor Hall, your thoughts. One of the issues, and it's an important issue, that was announced by President Jacob Zuma over the weekend, the issue of the opening of the lodgement of the claims. He said that they will be reopened and provide for the exception to the 1913 cut-off date to accommodate historical landmarks. Your thoughts there?
Thanks, Xolani. Well, firstly, let's just be clear that this is not the first time that this has been announced. In fact, every year or two since about 2005, the suggestion of reopening the opportunity for people to lodge claims has been raised. Clearly, there are people who were left out of the restitution process who between 1994, which is when the Restitution Act was passed, and 1998, which was the deadline for lodgements. The process really ran from 95 to 98. Many people did not lodge claims, people who were eligible in terms of the Act. And many have lobbied for the reopening of that process. Legally, it seems a reasonable decision to take that the minister, in fact, can propose to reopen the opportunity for people to lodge claims. Politically, however, it's quite surprising if this would actually go ahead, because for some years, the priority of government has been to get really the very messy and complicated work of land restitution claims off the table. And the terminology off the table has even been used by the former deputy minister. So I'm interested now that the minister is saying, listen, we know that restitution is a complicated, bureaucratic, costly process, and government underestimated what would be required to make it work. And yet it is now considering reopening opportunity for people to lodge.
Sure.
Let's be clear that that's the 1998 deadline, though. That is quite different from reopening the process to entertain claims relating to people who were dispossessed or people whose ancestors were dispossessed prior to 1913. That is not likely to be a blanket process, extremely unlikely. And the mention of Khoi and San heritage sites was made. This can happen legally. In fact, it doesn't require legal amendment. Exceptions can be made. But as I say, it's very unlikely to be any kind of broader blanket reopening. So we might see a few specific claims of particular heritage sites being entertained. Let's also bear in mind that this plays very directly into party politics. This is a process that's likely to focus on the West and Northern Cape, where party politics is tense and where the ANC would like to show that it's producing some real dividend in terms of rural development and access to land.
But you suggest,
by
Professor,
and large, this is not going to fundamentally change the landscape in terms of land claims nationally.
But you're suggesting, Professor, that it's more political than out of real, genuine desire to deal with issues of land restitution and land reform?
Well, let's be clear. I mean, government has, over the past several years, particularly since 2007, since the Polokwane prioritized issues of land reform and rural development. Clearly, these issues are on the ascendancy politically. We can see that reflected in budgets. We see that reflected in all official statements, State of the Nation, and so on. These issues are on the rise politically across the country. The ANC and its allies are raising these issues more consistently. So I'm not saying it's merely a political red herring. What I was saying is that the reopening of claims relating to dispossession prior to 1930 is not likely to be a blanket process. It's likely to be highly selective. We know that President Zuma met with leaders of the Khoi and San communities last year and came to a high-level agreement with them. So I think that what we're seeing is, what we will see is a few specific claims related to important heritage sites go ahead. And the way that the statement of Saturday was interpreted as being a broad reopening is not likely to happen.
All right. Well, we'll get some clarity from the Minister, but also I would like, Professor, to ask you your thoughts then about the land reform issues, the willing buyer, willing seller issue, the issue of the valuer general and so on. What are your thoughts on those issues? But also I see Professor Mayenda back on a better line. I'll go to him in a minute. Lines are open for you, 0891 104 208, 0891 104 208. I'll also be taking SMSs. In fact, already a lot of these SMSs coming through at 34701, 34701. Email me at gwala@sabc.co.za, 22 after 8.
SAfm has signed a code of conduct that is enforced by the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa. Under the code, we are committed to giving news that is accurate, comment that's fair, and programming that is not harmful, does not amount to hate speech or contain violence or explicit sex. If you think we are not living up to that code, then you can inform the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa. Direct any complaints in writing to the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa, P.O. Box 412365, Craighall 2024. That's the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa, P.O. Box 412365, Craighall 2024. Or send a fax to 011 325 5736 or an email to bccsa@nabsa.co.za. For more information, please visit www.bccsa.co.za.
What?
They asked.
This guy, he's crazy.
They said.
Too risky. Never gonna work.
They shouted.
Okay.
He sighed.
No, you're right.
He nodded.
I mean, a movie about aliens in Soweto. What was I thinking?
Imagine no one believed they could be more. At DSTV, we know that everyone has the ability to be more, to dream more, to achieve more. We're passionate about helping young South Africans to realize their potential. Through our film training program, we are giving young, aspiring filmmakers the chance to reach their dreams, while at the same time helping to grow our local film industry. Be More, a DSTV initiative.
The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.
Right, we're talking about the issues of land reform and land restitution here on the Forum at 8 this morning. Let me just read you some SMSs, and I'm going to go back to Professor Mayenda, who's back on the line now for me. Somebody says the use of the wording willing buyer, willing seller is designed to imply that it is the white farmer who is to blame for the failure of the ANC's land reform policy. Clueless, inefficient government officials are, as usual, trying to shift the responsibility for their failure. The claimants should first be screened for their connections to the ANC and whether they will actually add value to food production and the achievement in the environment. That's Jan in KZN who sent that SMS. Also, another one says, land reform issues will never go away in this country. The ANC needs this in order to buy votes and keep pals in jobs. Is Terry Bell has sent an SMS this morning. He says, willing buyer, willing seller is not a constitutional requirement. Perhaps just picking up on that then, Professor Mayenda, because you were giving me the background to this whole terminology around willing seller, willing buyer.
Yes, thank you very much, Xolani. I must apologize for the mishap on the connection with my phone.
No problem.
Yes, I was just trying to give context that, the willing buyer, willing seller formulation came from the British. It's a British colonial construct which came in 1979 during the Lancaster House negotiations with the Zimbabwean nationalists. Towards the independence of Zimbabwe, which came in 1980. And in South Africa, it was introduced by the National Party, who obviously were advised by their British allies, at the time. Now, how did it happen that it ended up in our policy, as the post-apartheid democratic government? My own take on this is that this happened because of the manner in which the Constitution is written. It is written in a way that leads to a gravitation towards this approach. Because if you look even at Section 25.3, which now is the subject of some serious focus, you will find that there is very little scope there for enabling the government to implement a different approach. So I do not share in the optimism that says we will find ourselves moving away from the willing seller, willing buyer approach. In particular, Xolani, if I may just point out, if you look at that section 25.3d, it says, for example, that the history of acquisition is one of the acquisition of the land is one of the factors that must be taken into account. Now, how is this going to be determined? It means you'll have to embark upon a lot of research. And in our country, all that has to happen is for a landowner to produce a title deed and say, look, this land is my land, I own it legitimately, and therefore I have an inalienable right to it. So what do you do with that? There's nothing that you can do about that. Then again, it says in section 25.3d that it should be established what direct state investment and subsidy in the acquisition of the land took place. And again, that information is not available, Xolani. The information about state subsidies that were made available to white farmers during the apartheid days is simply missing. Nobody knows where that information is. So how is that information going to be utilized? How are you going to formulate an approach to land acquisition that takes into account information that is not available? So in effect, I'm saying that the constitutional provisions on land acquisition are written in a very complicated manner which make it virtually impossible to implement any other approach other than the willing buyer, willing seller. And hence then, I would dare say that perhaps the government should seriously consider the amendment of this constitutional provision in its entirety, that is the property clause in its entirety, so as to ensure that the state is empowered to expropriate, for instance, underutilized land, which constitutes about 40% of the land in the country, to expropriate land that is not utilized, to expropriate the 25% or so farmers who are virtually just hanging in there, who are not doing any serious production, because in South Africa, as we speak, food production is the responsibility of about 25% of the farmers, who produce 85% of the land.
All right. Prof, just hold your thoughts there.
Into the Constitution, and then institutions such as the Office of the Valuer General and so on will become more effective in that context.
All right, Prof, just 1 second. I really need to get the Minister to respond. So many points being made by Professor Mayende here. Ultimately, though, the conclusion that he comes to, Minister, is that amend the section, the property clause of the Constitution, in order to enable government to carry out these reforms.
Yeah, we are mindful of that. Thanks very much. We are mindful of that. We will do it if it's necessary.
But he says it's necessary